I worked the night shift at a roadside motel in northern Wyoming, the kind of place where the sign flickers more than it glows, and where the silence outside feels older than the land itself. People always say the middle of America is empty, but that's not true. It just hides what it doesn't want to be seen. It was early November when it happened. Hunting season, bitter winds, and the kind of darkness that swallows the horizon without a trace. At around 2:15 a.m., a man walked into the lobby, tall, thin, wearing a long brown coat that looked like it had soaked through winter after winter. His eyes were strange, not wild, not angry, just steady, the kind of steady that feels practiced. He didn't speak at first, just placed a credit card and a driver's license on the counter like he'd done it 1,000 times before. "Rough night?" I joked lightly, mostly to fill the silence. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been on the road a long time." I swiped his card. The machine beeped normally, printed out the receipt, and I handed him the key card for room 203. He slid it into his coat pocket and nodded once, a single deliberate nod. Then he left the lobby without another word. Nothing about it felt dangerous, just odd. 20 minutes later, my manager called, something about a system audit glitch. He asked me to double-check the night's transactions. I pulled up the software and froze. There was no record of the man's card, no receipt in the system, no pending charge, nothing. At first I assumed I'd made a mistake, but even the camera feed made me uneasy. When I rewound to watch the moment he stood at the counter, the footage looked grainy, static crawling over the screen like frost. The figure was there, but fuzzy, as if something about him resisted being recorded. Then around 3:07 a.m., movement caught my eye. On the hallway camera, the one facing the second floor, the man from room 203 was standing outside the wrong door. Room 210, perfectly still, facing the peephole, just staring. I called out through the intercom, "Sir, sir, do you need help?" He didn't move, not even a tilt of the head. He stayed that way for maybe 5 minutes before slowly turning, walking down the hallway and disappearing into the blind spot past the vending machine. Something about him felt less like a guest and more like someone reenacting the idea of one. At 3:30 a.m., he came back downstairs and stood in the lobby again, but he didn't approach the desk. He just sat on the couch across from me, hands folded on his lap, eyes fixed not on me but on the TV. The TV wasn't on. "Can I help you?" I finally asked. He didn't respond, didn't blink. His reflection in the lobby glass looked wrong, delayed by half a second, as if the glass were remembering him instead of reflecting him. I called the police. I didn't know what else to do. The dispatcher asked me for the man's name. I read it off the license he'd given me earlier. There was a pause. Then she said, "That's not possible." "Why?" "Because that man has been missing since 1998. My stomach dropped. "Well, he's here now." "Keep your distance," she said. "Officers are on the way." When I turned to look at him, he was gone. No footsteps, no doorbell chime, no sound at all. Just gone. The lobby door hadn't opened. The hallway camera showed nothing. It was as if he had dissolved into the motel air. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They searched every room, including 203. The bed was untouched. The bathroom faucet was dry. And on the nightstand, lying perfectly centered like someone had placed it with care, was the motel keycard I'd given him. Cold to the touch, much colder than it should have been. The officers looked uneasy, but tried to brush it off. Probably some drifter using stolen ID info, they suggested. But the manager found something else the next morning. In the old storage room behind the lobby, where we kept boxes of forgotten, lost and found items, the motel kept a binder of guest incidents, handwritten logs from the 80s and 90s. Inside was a report from 1998, a guest who vanished from his room in the middle of the night. A guest registered under the same name, same signature, same driver's license number. The last line of the report chilled me, claimed he'd been on the road a long time. The handwriting looked nearly identical to the signature on the form I'd had him sign. 27 years apart. Some nights, when the wind hits the windows just right, the motion detectors on the second floor flash briefly on my monitor, right outside room 210. No one's there. But every time it happens, I remember the dispatcher's voice. That man has been missing since 1998. And I wonder if some travelers on these forgotten American highways never stop driving. They just pass through again and again and again. My name's Meredith, and before last winter, I never believed those old Appalachian stories my grandmother used to tell. The ones about spirits that wander highways, wearing the faces of men who never made it home. She said some creatures didn't hunt people. They studied them. I used to laugh. Until the night something started studying me. I worked the graveyard shift at a small gas station just off Route 23 in the Appalachian foothills. The kind of place where fog sits like a living thing and trucks disappear into it like swallowed prey. It was always quiet after 1 a.m. So when the bell above the door jingled at 1:47, the sound nearly jolted me out of my skin. A man walked in, mid-40s, average build, wearing a faded baseball cap and a heavy green jacket. Nothing unusual at first glance, but his eyes lingered too long. Not in a creepy guy at a gas station way, more like he was analyzing me. He came to the counter with a small notebook. "Could I borrow a pen?" he asked. "Sure," I said. He took it gently, almost reverently, as if pens meant something special to him. "So," he said, "your name's Meredith." I froze. I wasn't wearing a name tag. Corporate had stopped giving them out months ago. "How do you know my name?" I asked. He smiled, a slow, too-practiced stretch of lips. "Your handwriting, I've seen it." That made no sense, and he didn't explain. He just kept smiling, like he was waiting to see my reaction. He scribbled in his notebook and returned the pen with a polite nod before leaving. The bell chimed again. Silence returned. I tried brushing it off. Mountain folks can be weird. Nothing new. But when I checked the security footage 20 minutes later, something bothered me. When he walked toward the counter, his shadow didn't move with him. It lagged. Like the camera couldn't process it correctly. 2 nights later, he came back. Same jacket, same notebook, same too long stare. "You're working late again," he said softly. "How do you know my schedule?" I asked. He tapped his notebook. "You leave your patterns everywhere. People don't realize that." This time, when he left, he slipped something under the counter without me noticing. I only found it at the end of my shift while closing out the till. A Polaroid, a picture of me, taken from outside the window, taken the night before. But that wasn't the worst part. On the white border of the Polaroid, in looping handwriting identical to mine, was a sentence. "You should smile more, Meredith." My blood went cold. I never wrote that. I never would. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line, but the deputy brushed it off as probably just a local oddball. That didn't help my nerves. The third night was when everything broke. The fog outside was thicker than usual, so thick I couldn't see past pump 2. Around 2:20 a.m., I heard tapping on the window. Not knocking, tapping. Slow, rhythmic, like someone was testing the glass. I didn't see anyone at first. Then a face emerged from the fog, his face. He was smiling, that same too-practiced smile. I backed away from the window, grabbed the phone, and dialed 911. He just watched me, calm, still, almost proud. The operator told me to lock the doors and wait. So I did. But the tapping started again, this time from the back door. I'd checked that door minutes earlier. No one had been there. There was no way he could have moved that fast around the building, unless he'd never been at the front at all. The tapping turned into scratching, long drags of fingernails across metal. Then a whisper, muffled through the door. "Meredith, you write your letters like your grandmother." My legs almost gave out. My grandmother had been dead for 6 years. She used to write me notes with looping cursive. I hadn't mentioned her to anyone here, certainly not to him. The scratching stopped. The fog outside seemed to pulse. Then silence. 10 minutes later, the deputies arrived. They searched around the building but found no footprints. At all. Not even in the mud behind the dumpsters. One deputy asked me to describe the man. When I did, his expression shifted. "That matches a John Doe case from 2004, he said slowly. "Guy found up in the hollow? Never identified." I stared at him. "Are you saying I've been talking to a dead man?" "We don't know what you've been talking to," he corrected. They checked the security footage before leaving, and that's when things went from terrifying to impossible. On the footage, every time the man spoke to me, I wasn't talking to anyone. I was speaking into empty air, nodding, passing a pen to no one, looking directly at nothing, and when the Polaroid appeared in my hand, it appeared out of nowhere. Just one frame empty, the next frame it's there. The deputies left with pale faces and empty reassurances. I quit the next morning, packed everything, and moved states. But a week ago, I received a package, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, old, yellowed, smelling faintly of cold earth. At the top was handwriting identical to mine, identical to my grandmother's. The note read, "Patterns speak. You should have listened." And at the bottom, pressed deep enough to tear the page, was a fingerprint, not human, too long, too narrow, almost like a print from something that once learned how to look human. I used to work the night shift at a rundown motel off Highway 89, deep in the Arizona desert, far beyond where most travelers bother to go. People think the desert is empty, but the old Navajo men who came through sometimes would say the desert doesn't get empty. It gets quiet. There's a difference. And whatever broke that quiet usually wasn't something you wanted to meet. My shift ran midnight to 8 a.m. The motel was shaped like a horseshoe, 2 floors, 30 rooms, a lobby that smelled faintly of dust and sun-bleached carpet. Most nights were still enough that I could hear the electricity humming in the neon sign outside. But one night last May, something started ringing the service bell. It was 2:03 a.m. I was doing paperwork when, ding, not unusual. Tipsy travelers, truckers, occasional lost family. I looked up. The lobby was empty. "Hello," I called out. No answer, just the wind scraping sand against the glass. After a minute, I brushed it off. Then, ding, a little louder, a little sharper. I stood up this time, walked around the counter, checked the door, locked. The night latch was still secured. Desert wind could push the door, but it couldn't ring a damn bell. I was halfway back to my chair when it happened again. Ding! This time, angry, forceful. My heart jumped. I leaned over the counter to look. The desk surface was clean. Just the bell in the center, shining dully under the fluorescent lights. Nobody there. But then, I heard breathing. Not human breathing. Too slow, too wet. And it wasn't coming from the lobby. It was coming from below me. I leaned forward, cautiously, like a horror movie idiot who gets paid minimum wage. And that's when a hand, a pale, cracked, long-fingered hand, shot up from under the counter and smacked the bell again. Ding! I stumbled backwards so hard I slammed into the wall behind me, my throat locked up. I couldn't even scream. The hand slipped down out of sight again. Not a prank, not hallucination, not a drunk guest. Something was under the counter. I fought the urge to run straight out the front door and into the desert. Instead, I forced myself to crouch low and peek beneath the desk. There was a man, except, no, not a man. He was too thin, like his bones were wrapped in wax paper. His eyes were wide and black and bottomless, like he'd stared too long at something no human should see. His skin looked sunburned and peeled, as if he'd spent decades under a merciless sun. He grinned at me with cracked lips. "I've been traveling," he rasped. "Roads get long out there." I shot up and grabbed the phone. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped it. I dialed 911. The creature, man, whatever it was, began crawling out from under the counter. His movements were jerky and unnatural, like he was remembering how to imitate a person. "Don't do that," he whispered. I pressed the phone to my ear anyway. The operator answered, but before I could speak, the man was suddenly standing. I hadn't even seen him rise. One blink, he was crouched. Next blink, he was inches from me. His voice didn't match the shape of his mouth, like something speaking through him. "You don't even know what road I came from?" I screamed and threw the phone at him. It didn't do anything, barely grazed his shoulder, but it gave me enough momentum to sprint into the back office and slam the door shut. I pushed a filing cabinet against it, then another, and another. Something pressed on the other side, not pounding, not twisting the knob, just pressing, testing the door, testing me. The police arrived after 12 minutes that felt like 12 years. The creature was gone. Officers swept the place twice. Nothing. No footprints in the sand outside, no sign of forced entry. Even the bell was perfectly centered on the counter. But one detail made my stomach twist. One officer crouched and looked beneath the desk. There were scratch marks on the wood, deep ones, as if something with two long fingers had braced itself there many times before. They asked if I wanted to file a report. I tried describing him, but the words didn't sound right. They ended up calling him a trespasser in the paperwork. That word doesn't fit. Before they left, an older Navajo officer pulled me aside. You ever hear of the empty walkers? He asked quietly. No, I said. They look like people, he whispered, but they're not. They wander the desert roads, feed on loneliness, like to study folks who stay awake at night. My skin crawled. They knock, he continued, or ring bells. They want to be let in. You didn't let it. That's good. What do I do if it comes back? I whispered. He hesitated before answering. Pray it keeps walking. I quit the next morning, but sometimes when I'm on a road at night and the moon hangs low over the desert, I swear I hear a bell ring behind me, and I feel something watching, studying, waiting. Whatever rang that bell wasn't looking for help. It was looking for a way in